Meeting in order, special meeting, budget hearing. Just please rise and say the pledge. Allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mayor, pursuant to the requirements of New Jersey's Open Public Meetings Act, notices of this meeting was forwarded to the CoStar newspaper and the Asbury Park Press, as well as having been posted on the borough's website and on the bulletin board here in the municipal building. This is a special meeting limited to review and discussion of the 2015 municipal budget and related matters. No formal action will be taken.
Okay. And do we need a roll call?
Yes,
Roll call.
Mr. Campion had indicated that he is out of town on work, so he will not be here. Mrs. King?
Okay.
Here. Mr. O'Brien?
Here.
Mr. Schuler?
Here.
Mr. Tinkin likewise indicated that he is working out of town this evening. He will not be in attendance.
Okay.
Mr. Horbach?
I'm here.
Mayor Mechanical?
Here. I believe last meeting we had a review of the municipal budget from Mr. Delaney, which was enlightening. Would you like to just continue, Jay?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, and I believe all members of the council have the presentation worksheet, pages numbered 3 through 10. If not, I do have additional copies here. And there were copies placed in the backs for the public. Anyone else need one?
I've got them.
And again, this worksheet, although follows the format of the state budget form, is slightly different in just the presentation. It does outline specifically the current revenues, which fund our tax-supported portion of the borough's operations, the appropriations for each line item of operation within the municipality, as well as funding for our statutory expenditures, specifically our pension costs, Social Security. It also provides funding for our shared service agreements with the county and other area municipalities and our local school. Provides the necessary appropriation to cover the borough's debt service, both bonds and notes, as well as our capital lease, which the borough inherited from the fire district when the fire district was dissolved and absorbed by the municipality. The water sewer utility budget is the portion of the borough's operations that is not funded by tax dollars, but rather is funded by the utility rents, both water and sewer, that are collected from property owners within town. And then the final portion on page 10 of the worksheet is the open space, recreation, farmland, and historic preservation trust fund budget. And that is the dedicated 1 cent open space tax that is collected and is dedicated for open space recreation and those activities. The last meeting I went through and almost on a line-by-line basis and highlighted the various areas, both in terms of revenues as well as appropriation. There were a couple of specific highlights that I will note again, that specifically on what is marked page 3, the first sheet, line 14, fines and costs from the municipal court. Last year we anticipated in the middle column $120,000. But we actually realized somewhat less than that, only just over $91,000. Therefore, in the current year, the 2015 budget, we can only anticipate the $90,000, roughly the same amount that, no more than we anticipated in last year. But overall, although we are seeing a fairly significant drop percentage-wise in that category, when you look at line 23, the total Section A revenues, you'll see that we are essentially flat compared to last year. Last year we anticipated $539,610, and this year we're anticipating $539,700. So notwithstanding the shortfall in the municipal court revenues, overall, we've been able to balance that out with other revenues that exceeded our expectations last year. As I meant,
Can I just ask, I mean, clearly prior, in 2013, we made at least $120,000 to be able to anticipate $120,000, right?
that's correct.
Do we know what the year previous to that was? I mean, you have that?
It was somewhat less.
I just wondered how much of a drop was this? Was it back to more a normal?
This is back more to what I would call the average over the last several years. And speaking with the chief, as best we can tell, Spring Lake Heights Police Department was one of the first to utilize the license plate reader. We saw a significant jump in activity as a result of that acquisition in the 2013 year. And
that allowed us to anticipate that $120,000.
that's correct.
Okay.
And what essentially has happened, a number of other area municipalities have acquired that piece of equipment, and they tend to hit the drivers before they come through Spring Lake Heights, is our best real guesstimate.
Overfishing.
Perhaps.
But I think that was the important point I wanted to, if 90,000 is more our sort of 5-year average, then it's not something
Yeah,
that we did wrong last year.
that number does vary between 90 and 100,000. 120 was definitely, in hindsight, an aberration, but at the time...
We were hoping it was a new trend.
Exactly.
Yeah, all right.
Also, at the bottom of that page, starting at line 51, the section F revenues, these are our, what are identified formally as public and private revenues that are offset with appropriations. These are essentially grants of one form or another. As we go through the budget adoption process, and even after the budget is adopted, it is not uncommon for the borough to be eligible for additional grants. Those will be added to this section. And again, these are offset with appropriations, so there's no tax impact. Essentially, these are specific grants for a specific purpose, and the funding has to be spent for those purposes. But I would point out that although it seems a significant change from last year, by the time the budget actually gets through adoption, most of these numbers will be filled in. Again, moving on to page 4 on the revenue side, the section G revenue, line 7, the FEMA reimbursement. We are anticipating a much higher level of FEMA reimbursement, and in fact, that reflects the fact that we've already received that level of funding. And as Mr. Barrett indicated last week, and I will draw your attention specifically to page 8, line 48, the special emergency Hurricane Sandy. We are appropriating an equal amount, $84,000, and that essentially pays off the special emergency that was incurred at the time of Sandy. The special emergency being a term of art used within New Jersey local budgeting that essentially allows us to pay off an occurrence such as that over a 5-year period. This actually represents, let's see if my math is good here, 13, 14, 15. In year 3, we're liquidating that special emergency. And that has impacts, positive impacts to us in future years where our surplus will no longer be reserved to pay down that special emergency. And I would also point out that we were able to self-fund that without the need to borrow any funds and incur interest costs. I will also report that we have not fully completed the reimbursement process. We, within the last 30 days, have submitted an additional funding based on the closeout of the projects, and we anticipate that additional funds will be forthcoming. We've submitted a request for just over $20-some thousand. We anticipate that 90%, John?
Yeah.
90% was the magic FEMA number. So we do anticipate that, although realistically, we don't expect to see that until the 3rd quarter of this year, once it goes through the final state and federal review.
If we see that, will it have any tax impact, or is it going to projects that are already sort of funded?
It would actually go to our surplus, so we'll see the benefit of it really in next year's budget preparation process.
And the surplus now is like 400 something?
Yes, actually, if you, since all of you have the financial statement,
Current fund balance is $429,000, that's unaudited for the annual financial statement. And another thing to add to the benefit of paying off that deferred charge, as Jay had said, is also, for those of you who are up on council, during the time we could do a local review of the budget and not have to go through the state examination. Because we have a special emergency on the books such as this, we have to go through an extra layer of state review. So in future years, when we rotate, we'll have a quicker budget adoption process from start to finish. So that's certainly a benefit as well.
and specifically, I'm now referring to the pink support document. The second section is the annual financial statement. Sheet 3 at the bottom indicates fund balance. That's the $429,000 that Mr. Barrett has referenced. That's it on the revenue side of the budget. The rest of the revenues are somewhat in line with the prior year, so I don't think we need any specific comment on that. Moving on to the appropriation portion of the budget, which provides the funding authorization for spending of the various offices and operations and departments within the town. At this point, I should point out that Mr. Kinkin, as part of his notification, my discussion with him, he has requested that, as he did last year, that a portion of his salary be added to a specific line item, because he does not accept the salary. He has requested that that $3,000 be added to the recreation line item. So that would be on page, let's see if I have it correct here, on page 6, at line 44. He's requested that that be added there to the appropriation.
Just to,
That'd be 3,200?
Yes.
3,200.
And that has essentially no real tax impact.
is there a separate, I forget how this works, I'm sorry, but the recreation budget, right? We collect fees for that for certain programs. Where are they? Are they in this budget?
They are not, because that is a, think of it as sort of a mini utility. Technically, it's referred to as a recreation trust fund. And essentially, the revenue, that is a self-supporting entity, so that the revenues that come in from the various recreation fees are then spent for those recreation programs.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, that's what I believe, because, I mean, you look under the salaries and wages and some of the other lines, and they're very low, considering the amount of summer help that we have and stuff, but it's in its own.
Yes.
Yes,
And
that's what
just
I just wanted to be clear about that.
specifically, one of the requirements of the dedication by rider utilizing this recreation trust is that it cannot cover overhead costs, including the director's salary. So our recreation director's salary is funded by this budget.
Yeah.
And for those that are interested in looking at it in more detail, again, the pink schedule of trust fund reserves on page 6B provides in summary form all of our trusts. The recycling trust, our fire safety trust, I'm just hitting some of the highlights. The larger ones are third-party police employment. And you can see on line 13, the recreation trust. It outlines what the balance was at the beginning of the year, the receipts that came in, the expenditures during the year, and what that balance is at the end. And it's within a few $1,000s. Actually, last year we spent slightly more than we generated, but there is essentially a cushion that carries over from year to year. Some expenses, some revenues come in, specifically basketball program, it straddles the calendar year, so there may be instances where revenues or expenditures don't match up in the calendar year.
Yeah, I guess the receipts and the disbursements are off by like $3,000, right?
That's correct.
$46,000 and $49,000.
And again, I know Mr. Tinkin, and Chair of the Recreation Committee, is due to sit down with Sean Heater, the Recreation Director, and we will be adjusting both the revenues, the fees for the various programs, and reviewing the anticipated level of spending. And that covers, that program covers all of our year-round programs, whether they're soccer. The biggest one is obviously our summer camp program. That accounts for fully half of the total recreation program activities. But it does cover the year-round activities, some of which are very close in terms of the revenue versus the expenditure, and some we know end up costing us money. But in balance, the recreation program in total, again, it's intended to cover itself. Moving down, I will point out a couple of, in general, I would say that this budget funds our current level of employees as well as our current level of services that are provided. Specifically, you'll recall that this year's budget fully funds the additional position that was a full-time position that was created in Public Works last year. There were some offsetting savings with the reorganization of Public Works, the combination of the Public Works Director and the Borough Engineer position. But this budget fully funds that additional laborer position that was added last year. Also, I'll point out that the insurance line on page 5 at line 47, our employee group health, this is the net figure of our health insurance costs. There is a portion of health insurance that is contributory by the employee. There's a sliding scale based on the level of salary and the level of benefit that each employee receives. And there's a reimbursement process that's actually a payroll deduction that's made. So this reflects the net
It really
cost.
only went up 0.1%?
I'm sorry?
I said it really only went up 0.1%?
Well, it's gone up, although in this year's budget, we are still in the process of one of our bargaining units has not fully reached the maximum contributory level. So this is, again, it's a net figure that offsets.
So I'm just saying it went up, it only went up 0.1%, which is,
a very nominal amount.
yeah, like,
That's
I've
not-
seen some years I thought it went up like 20%, so
That's correct.
I'm glad to see 0.1%.
Moving,
Excuse me.
Yes.
Which character is it?
Do we, are we open for questions?
I guess it's informal, right, Jake? Sure.
All right, do we have a plan in place, like if a employee is covered under a spouse's health benefit system, do we have any plan in place, if you will, for the employee to bypass our benefits in lieu of, say, a flat payment of X amount of dollars, if said employee is covered by his spouse's?
we do. We have what's informally referred to as a
Medical opt-out.
yes, thank you. A medical opt-out, so that if an employee has coverage elsewhere, the employee can choose to opt out of our medical coverage and receive a flat lump sum payment in exchange for that.
And do we have any employees that,
Currently, we do not. We have several employees that, because it is contributory based on the level of coverage, we have some employees that only take the coverage for themselves and not their spouse, but there is no opt-out for that portion.
Additional question. I thought you said that the employees pay a percentage of their salary as a contributory payment toward the premiums of health insurance?
I wish it were that simple. I'll ask John Barrett to explain. There are a couple of different threshold levels. It's a combination of percentage of salary and percentage of health insurance costs.
Okay, because the federal government does it strictly on a percentage of the premium. In other words, I believe federal employees pay typically, other than I'm excluding postal employees, I don't know if they're federal employees anymore, but a federal employee pays typically a minimum of 25% of the premium cost, with the federal government capping their portion at a certain dollar amount, such that if the premium is over a certain amount of the health insurance plan, the employee starts to pick up more than 25% of the cost. Have you ever considered doing it on that basis, since the federal government is a much larger organization than the borough here, I believe, and at the same time, they've been doing this for many, many years?
If I could, the state law that passed a few years ago has a sliding scale, in that a person would have, you first look at the monetary value of their employment, their salary, and then there's a grid over a 4-year period of time that phased in an increased contribution by the employee. So if you're at the top of the pay scale, you are paying up to 35% of the actual cost of the premium. So in this case, we're a member of the State Health Benefits Program. We know what each different policy, single family, single child, is. We strike it up against their salary, and this is a state law that basically said
Right.
that. So we can't go to the federal law. In fact, the state law is actually getting more of the premiums back from the employees as part of their health contributions.
Thank you.
And to assign some background number to that, for instance, an employee that receives single coverage, no spouse or family coverage, and their salary is between $25,000 and $30,000, they pay 7.5% of the cost. If that same single coverage, but the employee makes over $95,000, they pay 35% of the cost. So it's a sliding scale that factors in the employee's salary as well as the level of coverage.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And as Mr. Barrett indicated, that's a state law that applies. So we are unable at this point to have anything different than that.
Right. Okay. It seems that the federal government does it on a much more simpler basis, where salary is not at all a factor, based on federal law or regulations. Thank you.
And then just for the record, just the gentleman to identify himself.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Sir?
Frederick Bath, B-A-T-H.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Moving down to the, we have also, moving on to page 6 of the appropriation, as I noted last week at line 12, the fire department, other expenses. Last year, we funded that at a level of $162,500. This year, that has been changed somewhat because we have broken out the portion of the last year's appropriation that is a direct contribution to the fire company. It's essentially the same rough amount of dollars, but it's just broken out to reflect it. And that was one of the suggestions of our auditor, to more specifically identify the portion that's the direct payments to the fire company versus the portion that is fire department expenses that are paid through our regular voucher purchase order process. Again, the Public Works, I mentioned earlier, line 16, that increase reflects the full year level of salary for both an additional employee as well as the employees that are going through our existing pay scale pursuant to our collective bargaining agreement.
In that same section on line 23, the other expenses for building and grounds,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering why, you may have explained this last week, but it's down 10,000?
Yes, that also is a reflection of previously in last year's budget, that was an outside contract service for our custodial services.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And we have brought that in-house with a part-time employee.
Okay.
So part of it's a sort of an offset with the salaries and wages in Public Works is offset by the fact that we're no longer will no longer be spending for the outside custodial service. I think everyone's favorite subject, snow removal, line 26. Looks like that is an increase both on the snow overtime as well as the other expenses, essentially for the purchase of salt and sanding materials. And it looks like I guess I should knock some wood. I think we are over the hump of, what are we, counting down 4 days till spring now. But it looks like we have ended the year in a good position, and we will go into next winter's salt and snow season with a pretty healthy reserve on hand. So I guess that's a good sign.
So did we get our salt?
We have gotten an additional delivery, although not the full amount that was ordered. So there is still some lag, and at this point, I don't think we'll be seeing any more snow, or any more salt.
Or either?
Or-
Would be really good.
I don't think there's any, I think I should also point out on that page, line 56, our solid waste recycling. In the past, this was identified as our landfill disposal cost. We have changed the title to more accurately reflect all of our solid waste disposal costs, not only that for disposal at the landfill, but also for, in some cases, recycling disposal that is much less expensive than landfill garbage, but still has a cost involved. And as same discussion regarding our, earlier regarding the recreation trust, we have a recycling trust because we do generate some revenue from the sale of our recyclable materials, but that market has changed dramatically over the course of the last year, and the recyclables that were sold last year for $20 a ton are barely generating $5 to $10 a ton at this point. So we're seeing that market changes quite a bit, but so we are funding a slightly higher level for those total disposal costs here. Moving on to page 7. Under our
Jeff, I have a question. Last week when we went over this, on line 37 of page 6, I have the amount circled because that's our welfare and public assistance. You had said that we were going into joint efforts with Wall Township.
That's
You didn't
correct.
have a figure on this. Do you have a figure yet?
Actually, I do. In fact, I'm glad you pointed that out. On page 6, line 37, last year that was funded at the level of $6,600. We will have no salary and wages this year, which is why that is blank. But I would refer you to page 7, line 51.
51?
Yes. And we've entered into a contract for an amount not to exceed $5,500.
Okay.
So instead of being paid as a salary to what previously was our part-time employee, it's now being paid as part of contractual arrangement with Wall Township.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Again, at the top of page 7, line 10, the statutory expenditures. You can see there's a slight increase in our PERS, Public Employees Retirement System. There is a Social Security amount is essentially flat, and our police and fire retirement system is showing a healthy increase. This is again part of the full funding for pension costs. This is a bill that's received by us from the State Division of Pensions, and I'll follow up the discussion we had last week. There is often much discussion about the level of pension funding in New Jersey. I would point out that within the pension systems that are operated by the state, there is both a state employee portion and a local employee portion. It is the state portion of the pension fund that have been underfunded for a substantial number of years. The state, being the state, has the ability to essentially take a pension holiday, and they have not fully funded pensions for a number of years. The local municipalities are required to pay the pension cost as billed based on the actuarial valuation that is needed to fund the pensions. So this is in fact a fully funding our employee portion of the cost, And John, I don't know if you have anything further to add to that?
Mr. Delaney said it nice politically spoken, but the state can do whatever they want, and unfortunately, we can't have that same discretion. So we like paying our full bills, and that's just the way it is.
I know you answered that for me last, but one more question, John. Do all the local municipalities, do they pay the same as we pay? Or do you have an option that you don't have to?
Well, there
I'm
was.
curious, I'm just curious.
Sure, the actuaries tables that basically define, take into consideration, our employees, the level of their contribution. So it's individual as to our bill as to a neighboring town like Spring Lake. But based on the same actuaries computing this, in essence, it's safe to say that we pay the same percentages of our employees that we have enrolled. The second part of your question was, could the township ever do anything about that? And the answer is that a few years back, I believe it was 2010, 2009, because it was such a jump in the pension bills, because they finally got serious about addressing the liability, the towns were given a deferral that they could pay over a certain amount of time.
Okay, that was it.
Basically a pension deferral. It was a bad cooking of the books practice for those municipalities that did it. I was employed by Newman Township, and after I left, I was a consultant there, and I basically told them not to do it, because the bill was going to come into play, plus additional interest charges. So it was easier to pay, pass it on, unfortunately, to the constituents of the municipality, and not try cooking the books for the sake of.
I vaguely remember that you did first. Now, we have never done it like that.
You can't anymore, not the one
I
time.
want, yeah, okay. I just want our residents and our employees to know we've never done anything like that. We never even thought about it.
Correct.
So in that jump though, the actuaries compute that every year, there's not like a way to predict how much it's gonna go up, right?
No, in fact, they've, last year, they actually revised downward some towns after they gave out revised pension bills. So there's no indication that they're going to revise. I was in a conference last week and asked the deputy director that at DLGS, and there's no indication that they're going to be revising these pension bills, so it's a comfortable number for us to take care of as far as the appropriation you see here and also in the sewer utility fund.
But again, we can't predict what next year's is gonna be until they give it to us.
No, I mean, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
That fund is not being, the state's not able to touch that fund, are they?
That's above my pay grade for this discussion. I don't know, once again, the state can do whatever they want. The issue at hand with what's in the media now, I believe that I've read, is that the governor's trying to impose this as making almost an IRA, a 401k account, as opposed to what's now a defined benefits plan. The pension benefit is derived from 2007 forward for employees as an average, in some cases, of the 3 highest years of earnings over a figure of 25 over 55 years. That's how they come up with their monthly pension payment. So the issue at hand is that the state has not paid into the pension plan as they should have for their state employees. And as you know, the teacher's pension is such that the state also, so that they would pay into that in lieu of the taxpayers paying into it on a local level, and they have not properly funded that. So it's, if you could carve out the local portion of the PERS, Public Employee Retirement System, for us, the local employees and employers, our pension funding is somewhere, they said around 78 to 80%, where the state plan is far less than that in their proper funding. So there is, if this does start to get blown up politically, I'm sure that the local unions will gather together and say, okay, that's fine, you want to talk about the state, but carve us out of the discussion because we have paid, as you see, year over year, our billed amounts.
It's also, I think, important to note, while we're on the subject of pensions, that this is likewise a contributory pension. The employee pays and the borough matches that. So this is the funding for the borough's portion of the pensions, but the employees also contribute towards that pension as well. Moving on to the operations that are out of caps, again, without going into too much detail, our budget is subject to 2 separate cap calculations. One is a cap on our appropriations year over year with a couple of exceptions. The largest exception is the portion of our operations and appropriations that are not part of the cap. And this is that break. So everything that we've been talking about up to this point were the operations that are subject to the cap limitation in terms of a year-to-year increase in spending. And then there's a separate cap calculation on a tax levy or a tax increase from year to year. And we'll be speaking about that a little bit later. Moving into the operations that are excluded from caps, and there aren't that many, but essentially there are very few operations as an inducement for shared services, shared service expenses, and your local costs are an exclusion from cap, as are capital expenditures and debt service. So on the shared service arrangements, you can see that starting at line 39, this is a listing of all of the contracts that Spring Lake Heights has entered into with adjacent municipalities, or in the case of several of these are done with the county, and these are essentially services for a fee. And they range from the Southern Monmouth Alliance to Prevent Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, which we coordinate with four other communities in the area. A portion of our 911 system is funded through a service with the county. County provides senior transportation services. We have a shared service agreement with the local Board of Education, under which by contract the Board of Education pays the borough a sum of $10,000 for ground maintenance services at the school. We also, the Monmouth County Regional Health Commission is a health service that is paid by fee. Belmar Dispatch, we do not have our own, as I think as the governing body is aware, dispatch services here in Spring Lake Heights are provided through Belmar Police Department, and we pay them a fee for that service. Likewise, the construction inspection services, we're part of the regional office that again is 4 or 5 communities in the area. Spring Lake is the lead agency on that. Our municipal court operation is courts sessions are held at Wall Township, and the existing Wall Township court personnel provide that service to us by contract. We have an arrangement with Seeger on the use of a roll-off truck. And finally, the newest shared service is the public assistance or welfare services that we previously mentioned with Wall Township. Moving on to page 8, our public and private programs offset by revenues. As I indicated earlier, this is the portion of the budget where we appropriate and authorize funding for grants that we receive. Moving down into capital improvements at line 27. In the past several years, capital was one of the areas that we had deferred any significant improvements. For those of you that were here for the last 3 years, the mandate that the council and the finance committee had given the finance operation is that we were, in light of tough economic times, to hold all tax increases to the bare minimum. And in fact, for 3 years, we actually had a flat tax, no increase. And that was, we were able to do that by instituting several cost-saving measures, as well as deferring some capital needs. And that's one of the discussions that we're going to come back to this evening, is to consider starting the process of more fully funding our capital needs. Last year, we inserted back in the budget for the first time in 3 or 4 years funding for replacement of a police vehicle. We've stretched that to somewhat the limit. Last year, we funded the replacement of 1 police vehicle. That vehicle was purchased and was delivered to us within the last month, 6 weeks. This budget includes, or I should say continues that practice of funding a vehicle replacement for the police department. And for reasons that probably are beyond our discussion this evening. Police vehicles are not considered capital because they're passenger vehicles and generally have a useful life of less than 5 years. So we fund that as part of our regular operations as opposed to identifying it as a capital expenditure. The next section is our municipal debt service, and essentially capital and debt service are the two sides of the same coin. When it comes to capital purchases, whether for improvements, whether to purchase equipment, we have two options. We can either fully fund it in the budget, or we could borrow the money and pay it off over time. So essentially, the capital improvement section is the portion where we are funding whatever portion of our capital needs we are funding currently, and the debt service is the after the fact. We're paying down debt that was previously incurred for capital expenditures. And actually, it's probably an appropriate point to take a little diversion from the budget numbers, and I'm going to refer you to this spreadsheet that is labeled 2015 Budget Debt Service 2012 to 2026. This is broken down into the three components of our debt service. The green areas, highlighted in green, we have the current fund debt service and the current fund capital lease. Below that is the blue section, which is our water, sewer, utility, which we will deal with separately. Essentially, this provides you with a 14-year perspective of our debt service costs going back 3 years, starting in 2012, and projecting that to 2026, at which time, if we incur no further debt, all of our debt will be paid in full. A couple things I would like to point out. You will see that under current fund debt service, the first item is listed as bonds 12-2003. Back in 2003, there was a $606,000 bond issue. As of the end of 2011, that balance was down to $76,000. That has since been fully retired. Also in late 2011, there was a new bond issue that was issued by the Borough of Spring Lake Heights in the amount of $1,740,000. In the last 3 years, we have paid that down to the point where our current balance is just under $1.5 million. And we are projected to, or we are obligated under our debt service arrangement for the issuance of those bonds. In the current year, we will reduce that debt by $95,000. And you can see each year over the next 14 years, that increases, that principal pay down increases by $5,000. And that essentially reflects a level amount of debt service when factoring in the interest cost. Each year, the cost of interest will drop by about $5,000 as we pay down the debt, and we are increasing the amount of payment of bond principal. Essentially, it's like your home mortgage, where you pay essentially a fixed amount, excluding any escrow that may be taken out for taxes and insurance. But the principal and interest total amount remains constant, but the proportion each year as you pay down an amount of principal, you're paying less interest, so more goes towards the principal amount. This is essentially the same concept for our current fund. The next section is marked as current fund capital lease. This is the fire apparatus that, again, was purchased by the fire district back in 2008, at which time the amount was $500,000. Essentially, a capital lease is essentially like bonding, but it's for a specific purpose and generally is used for purchases of higher-end equipment, such as fire apparatus. So it's what I would call a quick form of bonding. You can see that as of the end of last year, that had been paid down to the level of $227,000. And again, under that arrangement, we are obligated to continue paying that off for the next 4 years. And that will retire that indebtedness. Even though, again, it's called capital lease, essentially it is debt. The utility, while we're on the subject of debt, you have the sheet in front of you. Likewise, you can see that the water sewer utility, back in 2003, there was a $470,000 bond issue. As of 2011, that had been reduced to $166,000 and was paid in full during the year 2013. In 2011, at the same time, we issued the current debt. $645,000 was issued in water sewer utility bonds. We have continued to pay that down over the last 3 years to where the current balance is $480,000. And you can see that we are obligated to continue paying that down over the next 7 years. So as of the end of 2021, again, if we incur no further debt on the utility side, our water sewer utility debt will be completely liquidated and will be debt-free. One other point I should note, and you'll see that in 2013, there's a little notation. You can see that the 2003 bonds had a, for what I, lack of a better term, I would call a final balloon payment, where in the prior years, the principal was in the $40,000 to $45,000 range. In that last year, that debt service spiked to $123,000. For those of you that were here in 2012 and 2013, that spike in debt service was one of the major factors that required us to revise our utility rates, because we had this one-year spike. And to put it into perspective, you can see that actually if you went back and looked at 2011, our debt service was about $45,000 on the utility side. In 2012, it jumped to $125,000, and in 2013, spiked to $206,000. So there was a 2-year, very quick acceleration of debt service on our utility side. You can see that it dropped in 2014 back to a much more manageable $81,000, and that continues for the next 7 years until that debt is completely liquidated. So again, that's just provided by way of background for those that both were here in 2012 when the rates were restructured, and for those of us that have been living with it since then. Any question on debt service? Or John, did you want to add anything?
What I would advise the governing body is that as we have a conforming debt schedule that you see in front of you, there's going to be a point in time where there's going to be a drop-off that's evident on the spreadsheet. Right now, we're in historic lows for interest rates. You also have the benefit in the past of piggybacking on a pooled loan with the MCMA to get even higher bond ratings and lower interest costs to the municipality. I would strongly suggest that as you look forward to the 5- and 10-year plan on capital items, infrastructure improvements, roads, that you start to take a look at those programs so that they can be implemented over this period of time, and that we can take advantage if we're going to issue temporary financing or permanent financing these historic lows in the marketplace. Typical 30-year bond right now is somewhere around 3% for 30 years of interest. That's net interest cost. So, whether it's 15, 20, 30-year bonds, that's all going to depend on what type of capital improvements that the governing body wants to move forward with. And certainly through the sewer utility fund, we have available funds there through this rate ordinance increase that you had in prior years to basically dedicate more of that towards the capital improvements that the governing body and administration feel fit, seem fit for the municipality. So.
This is also an appropriate point to answer the question. We know, we've just outlined how much debt we have, both on our current fund as well as on our utility fund. The next question is, how does that stack up to, industry norms and standards? Again, I'll refer to the pink book. And the first page is the annual debt statement. This document details our level of debt. And most importantly, at the bottom of that page, you'll see it's expressed as net debt expressed as a percentage of equalized valuation. Essentially, state regulations limit how much debt a municipality can incur at any one time. Now, there are certain exceptions with the approval of the local finance board, but for our purposes, I would say that traditionally Spring Lake Heights has had a low level of debt. And that is quantified here with the indication that our debt as an expression of our total rateable base, which is the total taxable value of all property in town, is 0.19%. Under state law, the maximum amount of debt that we can have would be 3.5% of our equalized valuation. So you can see that when we're at less than 0.2%, we are, our debt capacity, we've only used about 5% of the total ability that we have in incurring debt. Not that I'm suggesting that we should change that, but I pointed out that it's a reflection of the financial health of the community that we don't have a lot of debt outstanding. We have a very reasonable level and manageable level of debt, particularly when you look at the financial plan that's in place that essentially has us being completely debt-free on the utility side in 7 years and debt-free on the current side in 14 years. I'm sorry, in 12 years. So you can see that as an expression of financial health, that's a very good number to look at.
If I could add, just a quick math, at that 3.5%, we'd be up to about $40 million worth of bonds outstanding or authorized. So by comparison, as the administrator said, this is very nominal for this community at the point of
I think we look at that way. I feel like I'm at a used car lot here.
Well, we have debt. If we had $40 million in debt, our debt service would be our budget. Just bond the budget.
And having said that, again, continuing in the appropriation, page 8, at line 33, you can see this is the area where we outline our debt service appropriations for the year. We anticipate paying down the $95,000 in principal, $63,000 in interest costs, as well as the $65,000 for the fire apparatus capital lease. As previously mentioned, moving on to the deferred charges, the special emergency, here we are fully funding and liquidating our special emergency that was incurred after Hurricane Sandy. And at line 54, our reserve for uncollected taxes. Again, I'll note that this is a non-spending appropriation to remind the council that because the Borough of Spring Lake Heights collects not only the municipal tax, but also county taxes and school taxes, we are then obligated to make those disbursements to those other taxing entities that have their own budget process, have their own legal authority to impose taxes. We simply have the pleasure of collecting it for them. This reserve for uncollected taxes reflects the fact that not all property owners pay their taxes to us on time. And because we are obligated to pay the county and the school the full amount of the taxes that are due them, this reserve for uncollected taxes creates a cushion that gets added to our budget so that we collect extra money so that we have the funds available to pay the county and the schools on time. That's the current portion of the budget. I'll briefly go through the utility side. And again, preface this by saying that the utility budget is not supported by tax dollars directly, but rather is supported by the water and sewer rents that are imposed to our property owners. We anticipate realizing just over $2.1 million of rents from the utilities operation this year, and we have broken down the expenditures. Again, many of the expenditures for our utility purposes are allocations because our utility operation functions as part of our public works department. There are employees that are shared between those two functions. So we have a process of allocating those costs between the tax-supported current fund and the utility-supported utility operation. Again, I won't go through the details. 2 weeks ago, we did a fairly lengthy presentation on the process for the primary process of our utility operation, which is the production, delivery of water, as well as the collection and treatment of wastewater. A portion of our water is generated locally from local wells. We also purchase raw water from the Manasquan Reservoir system. That water that we purchase from Manasquan Reservoir is then treated at a facility in Wall Township, and we purchase that finished water through the Southeast Monmouth Utility Authority, commonly referred to as SMUA. On the flushing end, the sewage that is generated within town is collected and pumped to the SMRSA, that's the South Monmouth Regional Sewage Authority, and we send them a check for just over $500,000 a year for the wastewater treatment. Additionally, our budget for utilities includes the cost of maintaining our collection system on the sewer side, our sewer mains, pump station, and on the water side, the water mains, the hydrants, the pumps, the elevated storage tank. All in all, it's a total cost of about $2 million, and that is supported solely from the revenues from our utility operation. At this point, I would also refer you to the short worksheet, which is labeled Current Fund and Water Sewer Utility Use of Surplus. Another component of our budgets, both on the utility side and the non-utility side, is surplus, also referred to as fund balance. Surplus is essentially the amount of unrestricted funds that we have available that can either be, essentially they are our savings, and in any given year we have the ability to, or we do, usually generate surplus. Surplus is generated by one of two means. Either we spend less than we appropriate, or we generate more revenues than we anticipate. And ideally, it's a combination of both of those things that create surplus. Surplus can be used in the subsequent year and anticipated as a revenue to offset and reduce the amount of taxes that we raise from our property owners. This schedule gives you an outline from 2007 to 2015 as to how much surplus we have used on both the current fund side and the utility side. It's worth noting, particularly when it comes to the year 2009 and then again in 2011, there was a portion of our utility surplus that was utilized for the non-utility purpose of being used in the current fund. And I won't argue the merits pro or con of that. I think most of you sat through again those discussions back in 2011 and 2012 when it came time to adjust water utility rates. But you can see that in those 2 years, a total of $210,000, more than $210,000 of utility revenues were utilized in the current fund. Based on the direction of the governing body over the past several years and the direction from the Finance Committee, we have discontinued that practice. Again, I believe it's this governing body's desire that the utility should stand alone and should not be subsidized by the taxpayers, nor should the utility revenues be used to subsidize our tax on the current fund. You can see that in the current year, on the current side, in 2015, we are proposing utilizing $290,000 of surplus, which is the same level that we've utilized in the last 2 years. And on the utility side, we are not anticipating using any of our surplus. That surplus continues to grow and currently is, John, did you have that number? I believe $599,000 is our utility surplus. Again, the intent of the council 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, when the utility rates were structured, was that there would be a period of several years. We needed to get over the 2011, 2012 hump because of the spike in debt service. But thereafter, on the utility side, we anticipate that the surplus will continue to grow for a number of years and then could be drawn down as a means of stabilizing the rates for what was intended to be perhaps 10 years. So we will, again, we continue to monitor that. Frankly, that level of surplus continues to grow. We are utilizing some of those revenues to provide a capital buffer in the utility side, but we very well may be reviewing the level of surplus on the utility side as well as our rate structure and fine-tune that as the governing body may feel appropriate after the budget session.
I just want to ask one question, Joe. Maybe you don't even have the answer, Joe. What would you consider a healthy surplus of the utilities, if there is such a thing?
Right, in the school system, if they looked at a 2% surplus, that's pretty consistent, 2 to 4% in the current fund in our case. In the utility, it's a tricky number to give, in so much that if you do have any type of infrastructure problems that you need to fund for capital improvements, as the administrator said, we can increase, and say next year we have, knock on whatever I can, but say you had a $500,000 infrastructure improvement, you could actually fully fund that repair through this. So there is no proper level of surplus. If I saw a few $1 million or $40 million over there, I'd say maybe we're going in the wrong direction. But I agree with the administrator that that rate structure was a cold glass of water in the face of a lot of folks. And at that point, it certainly did what it means to do as far as building that account back up. The policy of not switching over money to your current fund, just the equivalent every time everybody opens the spigot, they're subsidizing tax payments, and tax payments would subsidize opening up the spigot if you move money back and forth. So I think it's a healthy surplus for now, but I also don't know of any kind of impending capital problems that you have. So it could be easily balanced out very quickly with those type of problems.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
I'm just speaking of that, I mean, there was, this past year, right, we had a water main that broke. I mean, is that a capital improvement that needs to be done? I mean, are there pipes that need to be replaced, or there are pumping stations, that sort of thing? Is that, were you going to talk about that later, or?
Well, we'll talk about it now.
Okay.
To answer your question, yes, there are always things that need to be done. One of the challenges of a water sewer utility is that much of the infrastructure is invisible. It's underground.
Yeah.
We have the means of, we have a regular maintenance schedule for both the water and sewer side of things. We have the ability of televising certain areas where we have either known problems or suspected problems. I will tell you that specifically, we have in the works, or maybe more appropriately describe it as a pending application for post-Sandy funds to reconstruct two of our wastewater pump stations. For those that are familiar with our utility operation, on the sewer side, we have a pump station at Black Creek at the end of 6th Avenue. And then we have a second pump station on Shore Road at the railroad at the south end of town. Both of those pump stations are 35 to 40 plus years. They are both located in flood zones. Shore Road more particularly than the Black Creek. In any event, we do have, as part of the post-Sandy hazard mitigation funding that's available, we have applications pending to elevate and essentially reconstruct those. Hopefully we will get either grant or very low interest loan or a portion, combination of those, to address those two capital needs.
Do we have some estimation of what it's going to cost?
The current estimate is about $400,000 plus or minus.
Each, or?
You know what?
Or
I'm going to say each to be safe, but honestly I'd have to double check with our engineer who has been handling that part of it. We are not to the point
But
of...
suffice it to say, it's a significant cost.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
the important piece.
And
And
to answer-
and the funding that we're applying for, would that just cover a portion of the cost, or?
well, we're seeking all of the funding,
Okay.
full funding. Actually, I believe it's 90% of Sandy money is the standard split. How successful we'll be in getting both of those, it's still way too early in the process, although we've made it through the first 2 rounds of the funding.
But in light of that, if we did actually have to pay for that, and it was $400,000 in each, then our surplus doesn't seem so huge.
That's correct. Yeah, you can eat that money up quickly. And to
Yeah,
answer your other
that's
question,
the
which
point.
was the water break that we had this year, I would point out that on page 9, utility budget, under capital improvements, line 38, capital outlay, we budget a fairly healthy amount, $45,000 last year. We're proposing $55,000 this year to cover those contingencies.
Things like the water main break.
That's
And then the $7,000 is for the hydrants?
Included in that capital outlay, a portion is hydrants, which is about $15,000 to $20,000.
Which is the easier part, because we can see them.
Each.
That's correct. And those, again, in the hydrant side, we have, this will be year 3 of the program of replacing 5 hydrants a year. Frankly, we would probably like to ramp that up somewhat, but 5 seems to be a minimal level of replacement of hydrants moving forward.
I don't know how long the hydrants were neglected before that, but it was a considerable amount of time. And it's 15 to 20,000 each.
Well, actually, it's a total of about 5,000 each.
Oh, okay, okay.
Depending on, some of them, it's the cost of, some of the installations are more expensive than others, depending on the depth and whether there's a valve associated. And the reality is that water systems, generally speaking, it's all installed at the same time. So they all tend to age, they're all the same vintage. We have identified, for whatever reasons, the priorities that need to be replaced.
But to suffice it to say, we should probably wait to see what happens with the grant money.
On the pump station, that's correct. So that's the combination of expenditures. I'll briefly mention that the last page of the budget, page 10, is the Municipal Open Space Recreation, Farmland, and Historic Preservation Trust. We commonly refer to that as the Open Space Trust. That is funded by a dedicated 1-cent tax that is reserved for recreation open space purposes. And this budget continues the practice over the last several years of reimbursing the current fund in the amount of $50,000 for debt service costs, which is the pay down of bonded indebtedness that was rolled into the bond issue back in 2011. That portion that previously was identified as related to the acquisition of the Fletcher property. So this would be, Ted, I forget now whether it's 3 or 4 years, but I believe this is the 3rd year that we're continuing that practice. The balance of the open space funds are identified as available for other expenses. And I know that the Environmental Commission has identified a planned improvement at Fletcher property, and this would provide the funding for that, as well as the anticipated tree preservation phase 2 at Alair Road Park. That's the budget specifically. Now let me give you the bad news. This budget, as presented, equates into an amount to be raised by taxation in the amount of $4,256,000. To provide you with some perspective, I will now refer you to the untitled sheet that shows 2011 through 2014. I'm going to talk a little bit about taxes. This information provides you with a breakdown in summary form for each year 2011 through 2014 as to the amount of taxes that are imposed on Spring Lake Heights residents by the county, the school, and the municipality. And they're broken down into those three categories. The county tax is identified or further broken down into the county tax, the county library tax, and the county open space tax. You can see the progression of what those taxes amount to. I've also placed up here on these on the easel something that we had in the file. It's labeled 2008 distribution of taxes. Curiously enough, you'll note that at that time the municipal taxes accounted for 24% of the total taxes that a property owner pays. The school was 50% at that time, the county just under 20%, the fire district, which has since been dissolved, but was for about 4%, and then the open space was listed as 2%. I would take issue with the way this is categorized. This open space includes both the county open space tax and the municipal open space tax. By comparison, if you look at the spreadsheet that I provided you, you will notice that for each year in the blue highlighted column, there's a calculation of what the county, school, and municipal tax was in each year from 2011 forward. And for instance, the most recent year, 2014, you'll see that the county tax was about 22%. So slightly higher than what's indicated back in 2008, but when you factor in the county open space tax, you're within the same, within the ballpark. Likewise, last year, 2014, the district school tax accounted for just over 51% of the total taxes that a property owner in Spring Lake Heights pays. That equates, by comparison, in 2008, it was 50%. So again, there's really not much, it's fairly stable in how much of your taxes are for school purposes, how much for county and municipality. Likewise, when you look at the municipal tax, and we have the fire district tax has essentially those expenses been rolled into the municipal. Last year, the total municipal tax, including open space and what would have been the fire district, was 27%. So again, we're actually less today than we were in 2008, but not by a huge amount. Likewise, it's interesting to look, if we focus just on the municipal tax, and again, that's the primary focus of our discussion tonight because the municipal tax is what funds the budget that we've outlined previously. That's highlighted in yellow in each of the years. So you can see that in 2011, the municipal tax was $3,558,000. The fire district tax that year was $370,000, and the open space tax was $115,000. So we're looking at just over $4 million of total municipal tax. In 2012, the fire district was dissolved. Those expenses were incorporated into the borough's budget, and you can see that the total municipal tax actually went down. The total taxes for municipal purposes went down by some $43,000, about just over a 1% drop from the prior year. Moving into 2013, the tax rate was flat. Essentially, there was no increase in 2013. So from 2011 to 2012, the municipal tax went down. In 2013, it stayed the same. Last year was the first tax increase that we had. And the total amount of taxes went up from just over $4 million to $4,146,000. So I think it's just, again, provides the governing body with some perspective on where the budget has been, what the level of taxes have been, again, during those periods when the directive from the council and the finance committee was to basically hold things close during tough economic times. Last year, we started the process, as I said, we started to reestablish full funding for the police department, and this year we will move further in that direction. The budget that we've just reviewed, as it sits in front of you, provides for a 1.6 cent increase in the tax rate. Now, I will preface this by saying that because we are in the assessment pilot program at the county level. This tax rate is calculated on the basis of our taxable valuation of property as it exists today. That taxable rateable base will be adjusted up until May 5th when tax appeals are concluded at the county level. But as this budget sits today, it does reflect a 1.6 cent increase. And for the average property in town with an assessment of about $450,000, that translates into an increase of about $80 in municipal taxes for the year.
If I could point out the levy cap calculation, the governor's 2% levy cap, this budget is presented to you is also cap compliant. So we don't have to worry about any kind of levy cap waivers or anything of that nature, referendums. So, just to point that out.
The other item I'd like to discuss is capital. As I mentioned, I've provided some background on police vehicles and the fact that they are not considered capital for budget purposes. I would point out that when we look at the capital section of our budget, again on page 8 and line 27, over the last few years we have provided a very nominal level of capital appropriation. We've been putting a few $1,000s into our capital improvement fund, which is available to provide us with funds primarily to provide the necessary down payment if we choose to go to short-term borrowing or even long-term borrowing. And then we've also continued to fund at the $10,000 level improvements to municipal facilities, primarily as somewhat of an insurance policy for something that may pop up during the year. The things that are lacking in this budget and have been missing for the last several years, we have not provided any specific capital funding for road improvements, replacement of public works equipment, or replacement of fire equipment. Although I will say that the fire company budget last year, we've identified it, last year we funded it at a level of $162,500. There are several expenditures within that operation that are really capital in nature, whether they're replacement of turnout gear, replacement of radios. So we will fine-tune that to actually take out the portion of the operating costs that are truly capital for two reasons. One is that it puts it in the appropriate section of the budget, and more importantly, that it provides transparency because we are now identifying our capital needs and the level of funding that we're providing for them. I've also distributed to the council this short 3-page summary, which is a breakdown more fully of the fire company's budget proposal. And without going through the detail, I have identified certain expenditures within their budget request that are really capital in nature. And so that we can identify those. And so again, we can look at what level of funding the council is comfortable in providing for capital needs, whether they be for police, fire, public works, or our infrastructure improvements. What I would suggest is that we fund true capital, and again, if you think about it, we'll talk about the fire company. The fire company has existing equipment with a replacement cost today between $1 million and $2 million. If you want to make the math easy, you say the equipment will last for 20 years, which is a very conservative number. In many cases, the equipment will last longer than that. But if the $1.5 million in total replacement cost, divide that by 20 years, you can see that the right number, the minimal number to be funding capital improvements of the fire company is about $75,000 a year. I think that's a big step to take in the first year. Likewise, in the Public Works Department. Now, there we have 3 pieces of equipment that were purchased as part of the 2011 bond issue, the 2 sanitation vehicles and the loader. So some of our biggest equipment is fairly new. The balance of our equipment, we have developed a schedule to plan replacement. Again, when you look at the total replacement cost of that equipment, it's in excess of $1 million, probably between $1 million and $1.5 million. Using the same easy math, 15 to 20 years, you're looking at, again, $75,000 to $100,000 in capital needs in Public Works Department. Now, some of that, admittedly, is utility, so we can allocate a portion of that to the utility. What I'm telling you is that we should be looking towards the process of starting to fund these capital needs. Again, I'm not suggesting that we should fully fund the fire company at the $100,000 a year, but we should start the process. And likewise on the Public Works, and under normal circumstances, I would say the same thing for road improvements. That 2011 bond issue also included $300,000 of funding for road and drainage improvements, some of which is still out there because we haven't completed that process. We have 2 road projects pending. We were fortunate enough to receive state grant to fund the lion's share of those, but there are certain portions of that project, or those 2 projects, that will require local funding, and we have that available for the funds that were made available through that bond issue. So again, I don't think road improvements is something we need to do immediately. I think Public Works and Fire Company is something that we need to start funding. And as I mentioned earlier, the Police Department and the replacement of police vehicles, we have now, or we're in year 2 of a program so that the funds are available to replace those vehicles as the need arises.
So, Public Works and Road.
One more thing, John. I'm not necessarily comfortable giving $100,000 a year for capital to the fire department, but is it possible for us to have a fund that we set aside money in anticipation of these capital expenses that the borough controls?
Sure. Well, in essence...
Because in the past, the voters would vote directly for the fire budget,
Right.
up or down. We have that responsibility now. So can we create a
Sure.
piggy bank to pay off, to buy these things, anticipate that, we have a useful life in this equipment of X number of years, review it carefully and set aside the proper amount of money.
Sure.
So, because if you give people money, they spend it.
Well, in the
It's my
reality...
teenagers do.
In the reality of the municipal finances, based on the dissolution of your fire company, we are in control of purchasing equipment for any department, sewer, fire department, public works. The best thing that could happen is that the governing body assigns or develops a capital ordinance for, say, $1 million, whatever the magic figure is for the equipment that's needed for the utility and the fire department. And every year, without getting too technical, we can create in the budget what's called the deferred charge,
That's what
is essence funding that ordinance so that we would have it as a cash ordinance, say after 10 years or $1 million, 100,000 a year, whatever the magic numbers are, that at that point it would be cash in the capital account. You could purchase the equipment either now or at a certain point in the future. But by putting that part of the budget together, we can fund those ordinances, in essence, of what you're doing, and maintain the financial controls over the appropriations in the budget system.
Right, and the beauty of that is that we're not paying interest on some, we won't have to borrow. And, because we had a problem a few years back with the 2 garbage trucks, the articulated front end loader, and the front end loader, and a lot of other expenses and stuff. And, the garbage trucks were over 17 years old. So I really wouldn't like to see the town caught in that position again, particularly if we're thinking about our water utility infrastructure aging, you know, the hydrants, the pump stations, on and on and on. You know, if we could set up this capital ordinance as a plan going forward, I think that would be the best possible outcome.
And Councilman, to move forward that point with regard to the utility, as the other councilman said, you know, if you have a road collapse or something of that nature, having an ordinance on the books for various improvements to the infrastructure, having it on the books now avoids a lot of problems and gives the administration a quick remedy to solve those issues. In the event that the road outside collapses as a sewer utility expense, we have to come to you to introduce a capital ordinance in a hurried state with estimates that we wouldn't, you know.
Right.
And then wait 20, you know, for a second reading, 20-day stop period. All of a sudden, this problem you need to fill a hole today becomes a 3-month down the road process where you have cones around it and annoying the residents and, you know, certainly not fixing the problem.
Right, and, you know, I think, for example, Joe May's been excellent at getting grants for a lot of the stuff, so we could still apply for grants.
Right, and then-
We don't have to spend the money.
Well, in fact, what happens is, based on those grants, whether it's the sewer or the current account or the general capital, those ones, any grant receipts can be placed in and fund those ordinances as well. So it's a perfect scenario, but having that capital plan, that 5 to 10-year capital plan on the books now is a best practice I would certainly suggest you look at.
If you put this in a capital fund, is there a way of protecting it that future council people can't yank it to maintain taxes instead of using for what it's designed?
Well, specific to your point, not to get too technical, I can't prevent what future government buys in and do at any point in time, but maybe next week, another time. But the reality is that if the ordinance is funded, meaning that we pass the ordinance and I go out and sell bonds and it's cash on hand, and then I cancel the improvement authorization, that money has to go back to basically the fees or to pay off those bonds, anything's outstanding. So the reality is, by creating an ordinance and setting it up the proper way, it does prevent, or at least gives you assurance, that we're not going to have financial gimmickry, you know, moving forward with regard to cancellation, anticipation of revenue to offset any type of.
But the council would have to actually vote against the capital ordinance that's dedicated to the fire department or to water utility or whatever in front of the public.
Oh, right. Exactly.
So, I mean, in other words, it can't be a backroom deal either.
It's not an accounting, you know, moving of cards type of thing. It's a public thing that happens.
So the current capital fund, right, we have a current capital fund that we spent $2,500 a year, that's it, right? And that does have a balance of what, like $46,000? Is that designated?
You're peeking ahead.
I'm peeking ahead, yeah. I mean, right now, that's only for capital improvements, or could we, I mean, in light of this discussion, could we spend it for whatever we wanted?
Not on bubble gum or playing cards.
No, but I mean, could it be just put into the general budget to offset the taxes?
It cannot. Right now you have, you were close to $49,000 of capital improvement fund money. So every $1 million worth of a bond ordinance would need $50,000 or 5% down payment money. The current year appropriation you have in the current fund budget, in addition to the $49,000 you have sitting in reserves, could fund that $1 million hypothetical ordinance. At that point, that money is appropriated and produces the funded part of the capital ordinance, where the $950,000 would be the unfunded portion, where I'd have to go out and buy notes or sell notes, I should say. For that $1 million example, at $50,000 in cash, $950,000 of authorization to go bring debt into the municipality, through every year, through the deferred charges portion of the budget, I could fund that $950,000, $95,000 a year, and all of a sudden you wouldn't have to go out and bond for that full $1 million. It would be cash in the capital improvement fund. But it would be actually part of the funded ordinance. It wouldn't show up as a capital improvement fund line item. It's under the.
So when you fund an ordinance for X amount of dollars, can you do it over time without, I mean, if you don't have any immediate needs, say you fund it for $1 million and say, well, we want to fund that $1 million in 20 years. Does it work that way, or?
Generally, in the example that I set up, $1 million ordinance for the if-ands or whatever happens over the next 10 years, and I don't spend anything on that, once again, it's not a problem for us because we have not spent the money. In the event that you fund that ordinance over a period of time, 5, 10, 20 years, to the deferred charges, and you haven't spent anything, at that point you have a fully funded ordinance and you would not be allowed to go out and borrow for that specific debt issuance. It basically lowers the amount that you have authorized to go out and bond for.
The other option is to fund in the current year budget a reserve for a specific purpose, and we'll use, to purchase X, Y, and Z. And you could do that over essentially the same way that John has explained. Over several years, when it comes time to actually buy X, Y, and Z, you've got the funding there. You do a capital ordinance to authorize the expenditure, but it's funded because you've set aside money.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page up here. It seems that we are, that we don't want these funds that if we do put them in the budget, we don't want some future council to easily be able to say, just add that, to take that off the tax rate, right? We want it to be, if we're designating these capital funds, we want them to have to vote on it in public to say we're spending that money a different way.
The other part of
or not be able to do that at all would be even better.
The other part of the discussion is, people use the term pay as you go. The idea, you're putting money aside. I feel obligated to point out that the two extremes here. One is, and again, we'll just use, there's a need to purchase a garbage truck. Option one is you put, and it's $200,000, you put aside $20,000 for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, you've got the money, you go and buy the garbage truck. The downside to that is that the people that pay that $20,000 a year for the 10 years may not be property owners and get the benefit of that improvement when it comes time to purchase it. The other extreme is you wait until you actually need it, you bond for it, and you pay it off over the next 10 years, which is the useful life of the improvement, or in this case, the vehicle, so that the people that are here pay for it while it's being used. Those are the two extremes. There's some happy medium in the middle, which is you may not fund it fully in advance. You may not fund it halfway in advance, but at least have a significant portion of the funding available so that, you're not...
you do have to bond.
Right, that's fine, because I actually think if you did your 20-year example, I would try to be optimistic, in my thinking, and say, well, maybe it's 25 or 30, and maybe we come up short, maybe we don't, but we don't have to have a great, $1.6 or $7 million bond suddenly because the garbage trucks both go out and we need a front end articulated loader and a loader backhoe.
And ideally,
and the police, the police automatic license plates and the solar paneled speed signs that.
And ideally, what you want to do is look at all of our capital needs across departmental lines.
Exactly.
And again, just as we do with debt service, you want to have a fairly level funding mechanism in place so that we're not jumping from spike to spike for some years. You have a planned replacement. And that's what the fire company has started to do. We've already done that essentially with the police department, and Public Works is doing that. And all I'm suggesting is that we start at some point. And I think you're all familiar with the idea that 1 cent on the tax rate is $115,000. That's what a 1 cent increase in the tax rate, that's the additional revenue that's generated as a result of that. I'm suggesting that we're at 1.6 cents, that we take that up to 2 cents total, and that difference being reserved in amounts for capital needs. And working with Mr. Barrett, developing a program to fulfill the council's desire that there would be certain restrictions, that it not be easy to change that allocation, but at the same time, we identify in the budget capital needs, and we start that funding process so that This year, it would be, you know, $40,000 or $50,000. Next year, we perhaps ramp that up a little bit.
It was my understanding, Jay, that when we did that large bond, where we did purchase all that equipment that you were talking about, it was my understanding that from that point on, we were going to be putting funds aside so that we could move forward, and if in fact equipment or items were needed, that we would have a resource that we could go to rather than doing another bonding. And I do think that also encompassed with that was when we did do away with the Board of Commissioners in the fire department, we more or less signed on for responsibility there as well. And it certainly wasn't to deplete our firemen from not being able to have equipment and funds in order to move forward and, you know, do what they have to do. Because it was spoken quite loud and clear at the time that we did absolve the commissioners that the public was very, very concerned about keeping our fire department and making sure that they stayed intact. And, you know, like I said, we kind of assured them that, you know, yes, that will take place.
And that has happened in terms of the fire company, fire department operating expenditures. But the area that, you know, we have not been putting funds aside in any of our departments for, you know, those capital replacements. Other than, you know, on the utility, I should say, because on the utility side, last year we started that process rather aggressively by our capital outlay level. We did it in small faction on the current side with the funding for the police vehicle replacement as well as the improvements to municipal facilities. This is sort of the next step in that process.
Now, you mentioned that on these line items here for the budget of the fire department, that there were some of these items that you said should not have been on this budget list.
Well, we've identified them, and I don't want to say that they shouldn't be there, but we've identified them as acceptable capital expenditures. And what I'm suggesting is that we would identify those and include it in the budget as fire company capital. Again, that serves a couple of purposes.
Well, then, to be honest with you, I'd like to know what those items are.
Sure.
And not that you have to go over it line by line, but what I was going to suggest is that before we have our next meeting, like you have highlighted things in green, yellow, and what have you, maybe if you could do that on this particular list so we could actually see.
And anticipating that question, if you look on the second page, which is the first white sheet, you'll see that for the various categories of equipment, non-bondable equipment, training, there are unit costs, total costs, and then there's a separation between operating and capital. So those items that have a dollar amount in the capital line are those specific items.
Okay.
And just to be painfully clear, I don't think Jay's just changing the label, he's not cutting equipment from the fire department. They're getting what they need.
No, I understand that, but I'm just saying that it was my understanding that way back when we did that large bond, we didn't want to have to do anything like that in the future. And so we were going to plan so that all of our departments, and of course now the fire company is one of our departments, was going to have the benefactor of moving forward in the right direction. Because the other thing I noticed in here is that that roll-off piece of equipment for DPW, we borrow that every year from Seeger, and the cost in here was $9,000. All the years that we have borrowed that at $9,000, we could have probably purchased one.
And that's one of the items that is high on the Public Works Director's list of changes because it is utilized for recycling, and we believe that having the availability of that would benefit us. And I will tell you that that would be the item, the first item that would be funded with whatever capital funding we provide to the Public Works Department. Now, whether we're going to be able to fund it this year, partially, totally, again, ideally having a good chunk of it set aside towards the purchase of it, but there needs to be a balance, again, between those who are paying the cost and those that will see the benefit of its use.
Jay?
Yeah, Jeff.
The, on sheet 7 of 10, where you mentioned the roll-off container, I just want to point out that this year, in 2014, there was zero expense to that line item. And I believe,
What line was that?
it's actually line 50 of page 7 of 10. $9,000 roll-off. In the right-hand column, one over from the left, from the right, it says paid or charged $0. So while we budgeted $9,000 in that container, I haven't seen
It's actually reserved, it was just
Oh,
the
we
billing
reserved
cycle.
it. Gotcha, okay, so I stand corrected.
There's a question from the public.
Yes, sir. Yes, Dennis.
Tom Basile. I really want to thank you for this kind of presentation. I'm really impressed with the detail and concern that you're all expressing. And Mr. Delaney, is it?
Yes.
You've done a marvelous job on explaining this in content and in information. With regard to a capital budget, we at Fairway News have a third-party engineering study that looks at all of our assets, whether they be buildings, equipment, or even the roads. And the study provides for a useful life on these assets, and we fund each year, as was mentioned by Mr. Delaney, we fund a reserve account to provide that capital budget. And I think you're headed in that direction, and I would applaud that as a prudent way to, discharge your responsibilities. So that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you.
You have to justify this to the taxpayers. Yes, sir.
Well, I understand that, and that's why you would have this third-party engineering study, which would document what equipment you have and what other responsibilities you have to fund for.
Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Third party, yeah.
We, as part of our JIF membership, the Joint Insurance Fund of which we are a member, there's a component that is primarily intended as an inventory of our capital buildings, equipment, all of our insurable items. And that is sort of a baseline that we use for the same purpose. It's probably not quite as formalized as a homeowners association such as Fairway News would use, but that is our baseline in terms of, what is the value of our replacement cost value of our various facilities and equipment.
Yeah, then you would need a useful life to add to that.
Sure.
Fred Vath again, yeah. From Waterford Condo Associate, we do the same thing. And there's pros and cons to it. There's, as you mentioned, there's people who say, I won't be here for the replacement of the roof so many years from now. But at the same time, no one likes a special assessment to have a roof put on, which would be one of our major costs. So we do the same thing that this gentleman has said, and we reserve a good portion for both deferred maintenance, such as painting, snow removal costs for our street. Our street is, we basically do our own street. The borough does not do our street. They provide garbage collection and recycling collection at the curb, but not, I must say, snow removal. And for 2 years we're over budget. We have a snow removal cost in the budget, and then we have a reserve also in deferred maintenance for the budget because the snow removal costs are unpredictable, especially in recent years. But the reserve is a good feature, but of course, as the mayor had mentioned, taxes, the increase in taxes is a consideration.
And on that note, certainly within condominium homeowners associations, the use of reserves is very common, if not mandated, because of their capital needs and their very limited ability to borrow funds. You've used the term a special assessment, and the difficulty in imposing a special assessment for a very large expenditure. One of the benefits is that we do have the ability to borrow funds both short-term and longer-term in the form of bonds and notes. So the use of reserves and a capital asset management program makes sense. It needs to be offset with the concerns that the governing body would have about, again, imposing those costs for residents that may never see the benefit.
I would say one thing about that statement, Jay, that you made, is that if we, if we maintain a very small percentage of borrowing, under 0.2%, we have good roads, we have safe streets, we have clean town, we've got a good school, that people who sell and want to move out, and our tax rates are low, Spring Lake Heights will be an attractive place to move to, and therefore if someone's selling, they get top dollar for their home, as opposed to having potholes, high taxes, paying all this stuff that we borrowed. So, I mean, that's the other side of the coin. That's just the way I, and I'm a resident here since 1992, and I want to stay here as long as I'm, above ground. So, just saying.
Yes, John.
Yeah, John Tangent. Jay, you mentioned earlier about fire hydrants that we're replacing, what, 5 a year?
Yes.
How many fire hydrants today are not operational? Do you have any idea?
A very small number. It's a handful. I want to say there are 2 or 3 that are out of service, but there are, as I said, 5 that are scheduled for replacement.
Okay, so there's only 2 or 3 that are actually out of service.
That's correct.
Okay, so that 5 this year should cover them, plus 3 others that are maybe...
Well, and actually, last year we funded 5. That work has not been completed. It was expected to be done late in the year, but the weather, and that's being performed by an outside contractor. That work has been lined up, so we expect to see that happen now with the break in weather.
Well, I just think, and I guess everybody would agree, that's pretty important, a little piece to get the fire hydrants working, and the fire department would appreciate it, I'm sure. Thank you.
Jay, if I could just make a comment on that. John, when Art Herner was still here and I was on utilities, and we tried to formulate some kind of a move forward program to do this. And I don't know if this was changed, but at that time, there were quite a few fire hydrants that were either completely out of service or not functioning to capacity. And it was the intent at that time to do all of the out of service first and then move again to the ones that were not working to capacity and so on and so forth. I myself am kind of surprised to hear that there's still 2 that are not functioning, because that was the whole intent of it at the time, and Art Herner and I were both concerned that those would be taken care of. So I would suggest, Jay, that I think we do have fire hydrants over in the yard that are designated for replacement, correct?
That's correct.
So I would certainly hope that those 2 that are out of service would be the first 2 that we're going to do, and then move into the ones that are not so functional.
Yeah, there is a priority list that the Public Works Department maintains in terms of the cycle for which ones will come out.
Well, and that's true, because that's how Artie and I approached it, and it's been, I think, 3 or 4 years since I was on utilities, but I know that was the concern.
Yeah, we've also, in the last 2 years, I believe, replaced 3 that were not scheduled. They've been hit or otherwise damaged. The priority changed as a result of that. But,
yeah, that's understandable.
Long run fire hydrants. I see the gentleman from Fairway Views. I had a question from one of the residents over there. Their fire hydrants part of our system, correct?
Yes.
Now, do we have a schedule for Fairway Views, or are they?
we do, although it is my understanding that Fairway is actually some of our newest hydrants. I don't recall offhand that any of them within the Muse are scheduled for replacement. I could double check.
I did get a question from
Councilman Campy was saying
pass that on.
last meeting, right, that some of the fire hydrants in our system are 50+ years old.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And they
So
could go
Fairway
any
Muse
time.
is not, Fairway Muse is just barely 50 years old?
That's why I said I believe that they're pretty much among our newest hydrants.
That's good to know.
Okay, Jay,
Mayor, that's all I have. Again, the council wishes to mull this over a little bit more.
well, I think the first thing that the council has to decide is whether we're going to create this ordinance and then come up with a number, John?
That does not have to happen this moment. As far
Well, I
as
mean, that's,
Well, it can't, because we can't take any action.
I have my typewriter, so I don't want to start with it. But the reality is, I believe what Jay's referring to is if there is a estimate for a capital plan, that we take a look at our capital reserve, plus what we could augment in the budget, as Mr. Delaney has said, to kind of round off this budgetary number to provide $40,000 to $50,000 worth of those types of improvements. I think it's desperately needed in the proper budgeting for future years. Upon the council and decision to move forward with this budget, any kind of minor changes that we had, we would then basically then prepare the state sheets, which have been prepared in accordance with the budget plan you have in front of you, and at that point schedule the introduction of the budget and start the process going. So that's, I think, what Mr. Delaney is looking for, some direction there.
and I believe you had a date for the introduction, didn't you, Tom, or not?
I did.
I was mistaken.
Not that I recall it.
Next Monday,
I
although
think, yeah.
we are well within the time limits. And as Mr. Barrett has indicated, even once we introduce, we expect there will be some both minor changes, a result of our public hearing process. There will probably be some changes that are required as part of the state review. What I was really looking for was just that direction. We're at approximately 1.6 cents currently. If we were to take that up to 2 cent increase, that additional $40,000 to $50,000 we would identify as reserve for capital improvements and develop that more fully for the council's review upon introduction.
I wouldn't want to see anything above that, Jim, to be honest with you, that 2%.
That's for sure.
2
I
cents.
mean, if the council
So
agrees
you
to that.
said-
Yeah, the thing to note here is that the county actually sets the rate. We can specifically look towards the levy, and as Mr. Delaney has said, we know what the valuation is approximately at this point, subject to change, but we can come within those parameters to make sure that we do not exceed a 2 cent tax increase.
Right now, it's 1.6.
1.6.
In other words, everything around it.
Right, and that would give us the availability of funds for the capital improvement fund, so that at a later point in this season, whether it's May, June, July, the comprehensive capital plan through a capital ordinance, both through your sewer and your general capital fund, could be prepared and brought forward for your vote, as we would basically establish a capital ordinance for both funds.
All right, Jay.
And it'd be, operate, well, just, it's kind of like we have that open space fund, you know? The same concept.
Not unlike, we would make the funding available for capital needs,
Yeah, of course.
kind of with the specifics to be determined at the time you actually have them.
Right, right.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything on the budget?
I would just like to say that I think it's very important that when we introduce this on next Monday, that as many residents in town come out to the meeting as possible, because I know in the past, there's been a great deal of concern when taxes are going to go up, and I think it's important that they understand why and what we're trying to propose here and how we're looking to the future and trying to eliminate having to do some extensive bonding and things of that nature. So I really would encourage the residents to come out to the meeting on the 23rd.
Okay. I want to thank the residents that are here right now. We appreciate you coming, and you had some good input for us. Thank you.
So Jay, do you need the input from the council on that before the next meeting so that we can introduce?
Well, if there is consensus to move forward in the direction we've spoken with Mr. Barrett's input, we will finalize that in a form that's ready for introduction. Again, I don't imagine that the dollar amounts would change. There may be some specific changes as a result of either further council discussions, the public hearing. Even at best, we're looking at the adoption in late April. As you know, there's the 28-day period from the date of introduction to the formal public hearing. And our anticipation is that if not latter part of April, the very early part of May, we'd be in a position to adopt.
Okay, I mean, what I would suggest is that you put it together with that 2-cent increase, but make sure that Councilman Finnegan and Campion are informed of it, so that if they have comments prior to that meeting, they can get to you and, you know, I mean, we can still debate it at that meeting. As you said, we have time if people need to make changes. If the public comment section changes our opinion, then, you know, we can deal with it then. But just to be ready with something, make sure that they know that that was our
The 2
thought.
cents takes us to what figure?
You have that for Jim?
Yes, last year we were at just over 35 cents per $100, so it would take us to about 37.2 cents.
And what's that break out to the residents?
Probably about
160?
It would be, not quite, it would be about 120, not even, about $120 per, roughly $10 a month. I'd run the number, but I think
Just to, as far as to manage your expectations, you're familiar with also the public's expectations. Upon introduction of the budget, it is simply introduced. There's really no public comment specific to the budget except for the public portion of the council meeting. At a point in which time we have the budget hearing, that is when everybody can come up and specifically address, question, and express their opinion as to specific line items, debt service, policies, and that type of thing. And at that point, it's up to the governing body either to amend the budget, to take into consideration wants, wishes, and desires, or also have to amend the budget because the state's told us to for presentation issues. So at that point, depending on the level of what you would adjust the budget, we might have to have an additional meeting, which would be publicly advertised. So it could be up to 3 meetings, besides intro, budget hearing, and then adoption or amendment. So there's a little process here, and certainly the citizens can come and talk to the administrator if they have any questions specific to that process.
Okay. Sarah, right? All right, Jay, I think if the council would just, you know, move forward with your suggestion, and we'll take it up at the introduction.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. I don't have anything else, so I would, if everyone's okay down here, no more questions, Kat?
Kat Crippen, 564 Atlantic Avenue. I wanted to speak on behalf of the Environmental Commission about the importance of those pumping stations. Jay, I know you said you thought they were maybe 40 years old, but I can distinctly remember about 1967, 68 playing hide and seek around the one at Black Creek. So it's more likely 50 years old at least. And probably 6 or 8 months after Hurricane Sandy, that one did have a failure. There was a failure, the alarm did not go off. I heard it, and it was only because I knew what the sound was that I was able to go down there and then call it into Public Works, and they responded very quickly.
They got to take
I
care.
do have photographs of the raw sewage pumping up into 6th Avenue. And I just want to point out, I know a lot of people winced at the thought of the cost of replacing those stations. If you don't get the grant, you really do need to look at replacing those stations, because if they fail, one or both, they will pump raw sewage into Wreck Pond and Black Creek. And your DEP fines are going to be as much or more as if you replace the station, because you have a waterway which has already been identified as being critically important to the environment that feeds directly into the ocean. And if this town is responsible for raw sewage going in there, you're going to get nailed to the wall by the DEP. So please keep that in mind, that yes, you're going to have, you know, it's unfortunate, but it's a fact of life. We all get older, the equipment gets older. you gotta replace the equipment, and that's something that you really do. And I'll get you pictures of the sewage, it was really impressive.
That's okay.
So,
Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna put it on the wall.
and that was the minor spill, so do keep that in mind, those things have to get fixed, thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
And,